This is kind of a simple, broad question, but I think a lot about the nature of reality and the purpose of everything and energy and frequency and what's all happening. And I wonder what the point of relationships are.
Mm. Well, I think that Ram Dass quote is so apropos that we're all just walking each other home. I personally believe that the purpose of relationship is, I think love just might matter enough to us that we're willing to look at our stuff. There's not a lot of other things that matter to us enough. And if you look at the deepest core human motivations is connection and love. And I believe that it is the purpose and the evolutionary purpose, and I mean maybe from both a consciousness perspective and a personal evolution perspective, is that relationships, they are a mirror to the things that we're not good at. They show us where we're not free. They show us where we wear masks. They show us our potential. Like, you think about everything that triggers you is really an invitation to learn mastery in the thing you're triggered about, because the trigger itself is this hypersensitivity to likely a previous wounding that just hasn't been processed.
Exactly.
Right. So like when the trigger comes forth, we vehemently protect against experiencing what we're afraid is going to occur. And that's brilliant intelligence. But what lives in the actual trigger is the information of what skill would I need to learn to at least mitigate the possibility of this happening again. And I think really, when we can learn how to manage conflict successfully, when we can see that it deepens intimacy of self and other, that we actually can see that conflict serves us. It shows me, like, why can we not navigate a conversation and actually end up more in love?
This is like Cantonese for most, I'm sure, right? Like, I mean, think
It
about
would
it.
be for younger me.
Yeah, younger me. And that's why I'm saying, like, to think that the conflict is the gold, in the triggering is the gold, and is where you can mine, to use gold, yourself, and figure things out and expose those shadows and expose those patterns that aren't serving you, and in areas where you're not free. This is like a foreign concept.
It totally is, especially except for the people who speak Cantonese. Then it's a natural, concept. And in that, there are people that navigate this language, and I think it's a massive revolution of relationship, ultimately. Like, you look at what we tend to have inherited relationally is codependency. And, like, if you look up your family, wait, you're at home. If you look up your family,
I am home, and it's me.
Same. And if you look up your family tree, and really where we learn about relationships is from our families and our societies and our cultures and our movies. If you never learned how to have conflict and turn it into deeper intimacy, how the hell would you know how? The skill set is not shared, but it can be learned. And Eric Fromm, who wrote the book, The Art of Loving, he has a great quote in it where he says that there's nothing that we fail at more than love, yet don't take the time to learn. And there's sort of this arrogance, I think, to being human till it's gone, that we actually just think we should just be good at relationship. Like, we have this narrative that you get married by a certain age, and you're just supposed to make it last forever. Like,
yeah.
And
we
people
didn't even
say,
get a lesson on it.
I got 0 lessons on it, and I went to Catholic school, so I actually started with negative lessons, and I was taught that there was a giant white guy in the cloud with a beard that would decide if I was a good guy or a bad guy. Like, it's so stupid, and you don't get to find out till you get to the gates. Like, how dumb is that? And so you see, like, how much, so much of even of our perception of self is externalized, that God is outside of you. But anyone who's experienced love, and I forget who, I think it's Alan Watts who says,
Alan Watts.
Ask anyone who doesn't believe in God, ask them that when they're having an orgasm. And, I think there is a willingness when we've experienced enough friction relationally to explore the friction. And when we stop running from our challenges relationally, and actually realize that you don't have to run towards them, because that's definitely going to be awkward, especially after you've been running from them. But when you start to actually just slow down and turn around and turn towards them and realize, that that's where the gold is, as you said. I mean, I think the challenge culturally is that we are taught to avoid conflict. We are taught to vehemently disagree and just name call the other side. We're not taught the skills to build bridges. We're not taught the skills to deepen relationship. We're taught that if someone has an opposing view or an opposing way of being, that they're just wrong. And like, this has perpetuated our culture, and this has perpetuated our relationships. And, you know, I think we're definitely seeing that, especially now, relationally. Mm-hmm. And, you know, really, I think the future for relationship, but also culturally, is we all have to become bridge builders. Yeah. We all have to become the people who say, hey, actually, there's another way. And the other way is about, because if you return to developing a more sacred relationship with yourself, which is inevitably what's going to happen, you know, it's Richard Rohr who says that the journey to finding the true self is the same as the journey to finding God. And I love that, because if you go to find God, you find self. If you go to find self, you find God. And, you know, kind of speaking to what I said earlier, the idea that there's a differentiation between those things is, I think, what is weaponized against us sometimes, but that's a whole other conversation. But in this return of your relationship to treating yourself as sacred is then inevitably that you will accept nothing less than sacred. And also what you'll share with your partner is sacred. And then the reverence that you'll have to your partnership will be so different. But inevitably, if you do that, you will return to a sacred relationship to the earth and to everything.
It's a mirror both ways.
Right. It's
the mirror to seeing how you need to change is what you then project, you know?
And the solution, you know, speaking to the things that we are taught to avoid. I mean, we're taught that sadness or grief or anger, that there's something wrong with us if we have those emotions, as opposed to, well, what happens instead of looking at it, is there something wrong with you? And you said, what's right with me that I feel this way?
Yeah.
How can I be informed by that? What's it asking me to change? You know, I think that is also this idea that there's nothing to be found in the darkness, or there's something wrong with the darkness. I mean, I've been through a breakup that brought me to my knees, and I navigated that breakup sober, the first time I ever navigated a breakup sober, and I felt things that I had never allowed myself to feel, but
so heavy.
The richest transformations for me have always occurred in those sort of like roots to the ground, demand to be felt spaces.
Like burn it to the ground.
Right. No other choice.
It has
alchemy.
It's just alchemy, right? Like it's like becomes ashes that fertilize the soil for something else to come through. I agree. I think that's one of the hardest things about lessons and especially relationships, is where it comes up the most, but family too, not necessarily romantic, is that you really have to go through the shit. Like you have to go through that burning to the ground process, which from my experience is, I'm like, if it hasn't brought you to your knees, like you said, then it's, you know, the deeper you go into that sadness and that depression and the self-reflection, the bigger the shift will be. And that sucks. Why does it have to be like that?
It does. You know, it's the irony too, is that that is actually what enriches love. You know, like when you realize that when you love somebody, you are constantly saying yes to losing them, right? Like you're saying yes, the more you love someone, the more you are actually increasing your capacity for loss. You're actually, as you love someone, feeling the grief of losing them. And, you know, because inevitably you're going to die, or I'm going to die, or we're both going to die. But either way, the relationship's going to end. And when we can confront that and realize that actually in the grieving of that is the experience of it. Like when I look at my fiance and I experience the recognition that I'm going to die, or she is, this relationship will end, this experience will end, then I'm actually able to taste everything in the moment. But the denial of the death of self, death of the relationship, is to actually deny the richness of the present.
Totally.
So what an invitation grief is, because grief doesn't give you a choice. And when you can see that grief is, there's a saying that grief is love that has nowhere to go.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know that it's meant to go anywhere, because I think of like some of the most painful breakups I've ever had, or painful losses I've ever had. Like they are just made richer, although it's hard to process them. I don't know. I think that's probably the closest I've ever gotten to whatever might be the experience of God.